else? Christian, we start already. Okay. All right. I think we take a kick start already. The president will join us in a couple of minutes. Good afternoon. Welcome to the 5th high-level conference on academic freedom. It's great to see so many familiar faces, but also so many new ones. My name is Robert Jan Smits. I'm the president of the Netherlands House of Science and Education here in Brussels, and I'm your moderator for today. It will be a fantastic program we have developed for you, with, of course, a very nice presentation of the 25 Monitor on Academic Freedom. And what is different from previous editions, we will this time not discuss academic freedom in isolation, but we'll discuss it in the context of democracy. And that explains as well the title of our conference, Academic Freedom in Support of Democracy. Without further ado, I'm going to give the floor to Christian Ehler, who is member of the European Parliament and president of STOA, and he is the one who has put academic freedom on the agenda of the European Parliament, and is also the driving force behind the Academic Freedom Monitor. Christian, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. First of all, ladies and gentlemen, a warm welcome. I would specifically welcome the RTD Commissioner, Ekaterina Sarajeva. I would like to welcome also colleagues here. I see colleague Tobe, Esther Lakos, Ivas. So it is a joint endeavor, as you see, and this is not just symbolically represented by the three institutions. Roberta Metsola, the president of the parliament, is going to come. I think it had become a joint endeavor, which become from an orchid, almost academic issue to one of the central European issues, and I'll come to that quite soon. So first I would like to welcome to the House of European History, a new setting for our gathering. The Parliament decided to erect this museum as a place for commemoration and learning of the European history, and so it's a good place for that conference. The authoritarian regimes of the European 20th century feature prominently in the permanent exhibit to remind us why the European Union was founded. It helps us to remember that all our freedoms are not self-evident and that our continent has a dark history of oppression. It helps us remember that democracy is not a given and that it requires defending and promoting, not just as a political practice, but also as a way of life. At the time in which war is dominating the world and authoritarian leaders grow more powerful, it seems like an appropriate location for our annual conference on academic freedom. Therefore, as chair of the STOA panel, it's my honor to open the 5th edition of this conference. The STOA panel is a non-partisan think tank of the European Parliament, as you might know. Through our Forum for Academic Freedom, STOA has fostered a dialogue on the importance of academic freedom and, sadly, on the existing threats. The annual Monitor of Academic Freedom, which we will also discuss today, is an annual reminder that it is a freedom that needs active political support to be defended and promoted. That is why the returning presence of the Parliament's President, Roberta Metsola, the Commissioner responsible for Science and Policy, Ekaterina Sarajeva, and the Council Presidency is so important. But what is also important to know that due to that, let's say, common discussion of the three institutions, we learned also something, that there is not the good politicians. Also, we always consider us as the good politicians. We see the STOA panel, the annual monitor, the three institutions, we see that as the agora of Europe to discuss that, because what had been important is not that politics is deciding what is academic freedom. Discussion is leaded and structured by the academia itself. I would like to welcome with a short applause the President of the European Parliament, Roberta Metsola.
President, welcome. Good to see you.
So protecting academic freedom and democracy is a collective responsibility of the three union institutions. The commitment shown by the continuous dialogue between the institutions emphasizes our shared belief that European democracy and the European project cannot survive without academic freedom. And here we have an issue in Europe. As highlighted in our monitor, the EU Barometer found that 52% of the Union citizens agree with the statement that, I quote, because of their knowledge, scientists have a power that makes them dangerous. And we should be aware that the discussion about academic freedom is not a discussion about academic freedom itself, an academic exercise, or a kind of orchid political exercise. It's part of a broader discussion and broader challenges in our European societies. If science knowledge is conceived as a danger, deliberative democracy becomes impossible. Science provides us with a common reality and with a source of critical reflections. Both are indispensable parts of a vibrant democracy that is able to resist the attraction of populist authoritarianism. So what I'm reflecting today, as I said, we started in the very beginning on a more academic setting on the challenges of academic freedom, driven, sadly, by developments in some member states. But we should be aware that within these 5 years, it became a global discussion. And I'm always very careful to see, let's say, principal values of the European Union as a kind of political selling points, but we shouldn't forget that in the rest of the world, in the academia, the European model is the only preserved model where academic freedom is at the center of the ethic values and policies in Europe. I mean, who wouldn't have thought that the leader of, or the self-declared, I mean, depends on where you are, the self-declared leader of the Western world would challenge academic freedom in the 21st century, as we have seen that recently in the United States. But just looking to the United States is also not just the issue. We learned that in practical cases, this is not just an academic discussion about democracy and the structure and the basis of democracy in other parts of the world. It had become an issue in terms of whether we have at least some kind of joint approach to solve global problems. If you have seen the restrictive kind of policy, not just information policy, but also the restrictions in terms of science during the COVID crisis, as it had been in China and as it had been in Russia, we see that it's not yet a democratic exercise. It is also challenging our ability globally to solve in a common way, based on science and common knowledge, the global challenges in the world. So in a way, I salute, and I would like particularly to thank Roberta Metsola, but also the Commissioner for their ongoing engagement. But we see this is not just an academic exercise which found interest by interested and intellectually interested politicians. It is one of the central issues also in the global positioning of the European Union. If we are now regarded as the safe harbor for science globally, that puts an obligation on our shoulders, which makes us also then obliged to have a critical view to what extent this safe haven internally is actually existing, what can we do for that, and so we are very much looking forward what the Commission is bringing forward in terms of to create a legal base for at least the freedom of science in Europe. Although we have to be honest, there are limits to the treaties, but there are no limits for the forum as the three institutions represent for Europe, the agora of Europe, to discuss academic freedom also in the educational part and the principal freedom of academic institutions in Europe. So having said that, I think that's our task today, to strengthen European democracy and academic freedom, to fend off Europe's return to its authoritarian history, so well displayed in this House of European History, but it has gotten a global dimension which we might not have thought 10 years ago. That would be a discussion which goes far beyond the limitations of, let's say, the academia or an academic exercise on academic freedom in Europe. Thank you very much, and I might like to give the floor to Roberta Metsola, and thank you yet again for your engagement.
Thank you, Christian. Thank you very much for these introductory statements, and indeed, without further ado, I give the floor to the President of the European Parliament. Great that you're here. And you've been there almost at all the editions of this conference, and that shows your personal commitment as well to the topic of academic freedom. So, President, may I invite you? Take the floor.
Thank you very much. Thank you, dear Robert Jan. This is our annual meeting with you, in fact.
Exactly.
Dear Christian, dear Commissioner, dear Katerina, dear Mr. Semido, it's truly great to be here. I think it's a nice setting. We usually meet in the library. In fact, I almost went there by mistake on the way here. But it is the theme of this discussion that really gets to the very core of our work in this Parliament. And what better place to have such a discussion than here in the House of European History. That for democracy to flourish, we really need to protect the freedoms that support it. This is something that we in Europe have fought for and built together over decades. Because we know that for democracy to work, it must be constructed on top of those very hard-won values. But academic independence is more than just a pillar of an open and free Europe, and this goes in the direction of what you've just said, Christian. It is the soil which nurtures so many of the discoveries and the innovations that shape our society and move it forward. We see this played over and over again. From giving our innovators the independence and the support they need, to create smaller and more powerful, for example, microchips that ultimately helped land a spacecraft on the moon, to providing the independent funding for scientists to explore mRNA technologies that would eventually lead to the coronavirus vaccine. And it was that freedom to ask the hard questions and think critically that it is a key part of what it means to be European. And from our universities to our labs, it is a foundational element of our European way of life. But it doesn't stop there. We know that by boosting academic independence, we can unlock growth and innovation that will benefit everyone, bringing down the cost of living and driving up economic opportunity. You made a reference to the United States. If we look at the United States, we can witness this in a way in action. So first of all, academic freedom is constitutionally protected under the First Amendment. Now, this sets the scene to make American universities the engines of economic growth. So right now, over 35 of the world's top 100 research universities are there. Meanwhile, you have science facilities and startups that are world-leading, where you can see the numbers of patents that are filed and how we as Europe and individually our member states compete or not in this regard. And I think it would be good for us to really look at how we can invest more in making sure that we find the talent, we build it, and then we register it and remember it. So in a way, Benjamin Franklin really did get it right when he said an investment in knowledge pays the best interest. However, we know, also as you just said, there are challenges to academic freedom on both sides of the Atlantic. This was also recently discussed in STOA's annual lecture and in the latest edition of the Academic Freedom Monitor. Part of this is driven by an eroding trust in science and academia, driven by an overwhelming rise in disinformation. Today, 2/3 of Europeans feel exposed to fake news regularly. Over 80% feel that this disinformation threatens our democracy. So when our platforms give equal weight and equal reach to a research paper and a controversial tweet promoting a falsehood, we need to realize the scale of the challenge we are facing. Increasingly in this regard, I am concerned that the same model will be applied to artificial intelligence. But the problems, of course, go deeper than this. We know that our freedoms are being damaged by polarization. This is pushed online by the monetization of manufactured outrage. We see this every day. That takes precedence over studied moderation or carefully, years-long, carried out research. This is on top of the ongoing challenges, multi-challenges that we have of political interference, of funding pressures, and so much more. So as politicians or as academics, we have to be open-eyed about the challenges and not act like deer in the headlights. When these issues bubble to the surface, and they clearly, we can see it, but sometimes we see it too late, have societal implications. I would like to take this opportunity then to refer to Iran and what is happening there, but also by taking us back. We see the suppression of freedoms played out in real time. But I'll take you back to an early action of the newly installed Islamic Republic regime in 1980, which one of the first actions was to arrest and then kill Farrokh Parsa, who was the then Minister of Education and the first woman minister in Iran. The reason? Academic independence was seen as a threat. Look where we are now. It will always be a threat to despots and dictators. That is why we preserve it, why we fight for it, and why it matters so much to us in the European Parliament. Standing up for academic freedom, dear Commissioner, as a pillar of our democracy is a team effort. And that is why it's great that you are here with us every year. That is why this conference has become such a staple of our institutional calendar. So thank you also, and most of all, dear Christian, for making today happen, for your personal commitment and for all your hard work as chair, together with all the fellow members in the Parliament Science and Technology Options Assessment Body who continue to stand up every day for independent academia and for giving us the possibility to discuss, go into depth in days when sometimes you spend time just going from 20-minute meetings to 20-minute meetings. This is a moment to take pause and really have a look at what we are doing and where we can achieve. Acting now to preserve these freedoms isn't just in the interest of academia, it is in the interest of all of us. That is how we help European businesses to lead in the fields that are shaping our world, like artificial intelligence, biotech, and quantum. It is how we strengthen our world-class research and innovation sectors and how we turn today's academic breakthroughs into tomorrow's scientific solutions. When academic freedom is paired with European prowess, we have the real formula for change. And we are getting there because Europe's levels of innovation have grown by over 12% in the last decade, but we can do better. And we are making that ambition a reality. Streamlining legislation so we can kickstart innovation, help startups to scale up, and support entrepreneurs to find the next big breakthrough right here at home. And on this, you can rely on this Parliament's support to see that happen, and we will continue to push for more funding for research and innovation. Meanwhile, we remain committed to those core European values that keep our democracy healthy. Our Democracy Shield Committee's upcoming report highlights the importance, Thomas is our rapporteur, of safeguarding our democratic system against interference and disinformation. And we need to see that report translate into real legislative and technological solutions to how we are going to make the life online and in the society for our citizens better. We look forward to the upcoming European Research Area Act, where we must keep pushing for academic freedom as a central element. So, short list of what we're working on and where we would like to reach, achieve. Today is an opportunity really to share ideas, to chart the path ahead and push for action. So supporting independent research, protecting centres of academic excellence, and preserving free and independent academic funding across our union is how we can get there. This way, we don't just unlock economic opportunity, but ultimately we future-proof our democracy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, President. And it's now my pleasure and honor to give the floor to the Commissioner on behalf of the European Commission, the Commissioner for Startups, Research and Innovation. The floor is yours, Commissioner.
Thank you, Robert Jan. Dear President Metsola, dear Roberta, dear Christian, honorable members of the European Parliament, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure for me to open this conference for the second time. And for inviting me, as Roberta said, in this really remarkable place and really very meaningful place for this event, the House of European History. Because since the age of enlightenment, the freedom of to question, to research, to challenge authority runs deep into our history. And we should take proud of it. According to our Academic Freedom Index, 85% of our member states enjoy the highest rating. It is, but still 15 obviously are not. It's a fundamental pillar of our union and of our European way of life. And perhaps because in our history has clearly shown what is happening when this freedom disappears. Roberto, you gave example what is happening at one of the first sections of the change of the regime. I want to bring one example, which is from 1940s and 50s in the Eastern Bloc, including the country that I come from, Bulgaria, when the scientific theories of Mendel and Darwin were dismissed by the state, considered as bourgeois science. And in the fields like agronomy, for example, they were instead replaced with the doctrines of pseudoscientists, I would say, that were part of the Soviet elite. And they rejected the gene existence. They believed that the plants can be learned, educated how to produce more. And thousands of biologists who questioned actually this new theory were imprisoned, and many of them were killed. And in the result of this, many people lost their lives because of hunger. This historical episode points a simple reality. As you said, I think Christian both and Roberta, democracy and academic freedom rise and fall together. Neither science nor democracy can thrive when power decides what is true. Science cannot work without the freedom to disagree, to question, to challenge. And democracy relies and rests exactly more or less on the same principles and same methods. Testing ideas openly, discussing, learning from errors and mistakes, correcting mistakes and moving forward. So today, as we see a retreat of liberal democracy, it is no surprise that global researchers face growing pressure. Russian researchers are labeled foreign agents if they criticize the state. Chinese authorities intimidating Western universities to bend their agenda away from human rights. US scientists finding themselves under gunfire, I would say, on part of health science, climate, and gender, and so on and so forth. These attacks on science are attacks on democracy itself. I really believe it. And as Christian said in his speech, our responsibility is even higher than ever. Why, as I said, the situation in Europe is better, we cannot lower our guard because we still have a lot of weaknesses as well. And we are here too. We start to see more and more dangerous rhetoric, which is questioning scientific freedom as well. I want to be very clear about this. Horizon Europe will continue supporting bottom-up and free research. It is part of our strength. This includes also societal challenges and humanities. I know this topic is very close to many in this room. because they are crucial for open and resilient democracies. A year ago, in front of STOA, here in the library, as Roberta said, I committed to making Europe the global leader in free research during this mandate. And I'm glad to report you that we are making progress. We launched the Choose Europe. Very grateful for your support, for your push for this initiative. Remarkable Team Europe approach, more than 100 member states initiatives together with the European Commission initiative to support. And non-European applicants to our latest European Research Council call have doubled. Candidates from the United States increased by 5 times. This is proof that in times of uncertainty, global researchers are looking to Europe as an anchor. This is our competitive advantage. I really believe this is our advantage for our economy as well, actually. Moving ahead, we must ensure these democratic and academic foundations remain strong. We hear concerns from the research community in recent consultations. You know that we launched a consultation for ERA. We received, I think, more than 170 replies, which shows a huge interest to the upcoming ERA Act. Many of them were linked with scientific freedom, security of science, which is something that we have to reflect. Fifth freedom, as you know, that letter. So I'm very grateful for those inputs and for this active participation of many research organizations, institutions and scientists themselves. And some have pointed to funding dependencies and public harassment. Legal protection are there, but they are not very even, depends on the member states. Some are not strong enough in their opinion. So this shows us that the decision to embed, and also after the resolution of the European Parliament, to embed the scientific freedom in law, it was the right decision. Last year, we made scientific freedom a key objective of the European Democracy Shield. And later this year, as I already said, we are going to propose a European, and we are going to embed it in the European Research Area Act. It will be a comprehensive package, defending core rights of researchers, but also strengthening our institutional autonomy and transparent governance, and making research career more attractive and mobility opportunities for researchers easier. Very often in my speeches, when I start to explain, I always try to start positive, actually, to explain what are our strengths in Europe. Always on the number one, I mentioned the fact that we are a scientific powerhouse, that with less than 5% of the world population, we actually host a quota of world researchers. But I really believe that if we don't work to make research career attractive for young people, this will be not very long the case. So I really believe that ERA Act embed scientific freedom together with career perspective, career mobility opportunities, and right of the researchers will also help this and to strengthen also the single market. So to conclude, ladies and gentlemen, this Commission is committed to strengthen the virtuous cycle between free science and open societies for our scientific excellence, our democratic resilience, and our long-term competitiveness. In doing so, STOA and the European Parliament will remain an essential partner, including with key insights like the Academic Freedom Monitor you will present today. Very grateful once again for you, Christian, as Roberta said personally, that I feel your passion and your belief, and the fact that you always keep this very high in the agenda, because I know that sometimes when you're really occupied with a lot of things, like the next MFF is coming, the 28th regime is coming, I think sometimes we can really put this aside, but I can reassure you that we are working hard to have a good legislation, We discussed a lot with the scientists. Yesterday, for example, I met a professor from Germany of the big research organization and the council there. I was questioned, do you think that we should have a separate legislation about scientific freedom? Do you think it's a good idea to be part of the European Research Area Act? So this shows also how important for the scientists, especially now in this moment, this principle it is. Because we talk about scientific freedom, but today during the college we actually approved the gender equality, the strategy and plan. And I share data about gender equality in science and research, and unfortunately they haven't changed since decades. So we have a lot of work to do as well. And unfortunately, I mean, the basic principles for gender equality, equal opportunities of women and men in science and research are questioned as well. So not only scientific freedom. So we have a lot of work to do together. And I think this make Europe more attractive, reliable, and strong. So thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. And well, despite these challenging times, we have also a representative of the Cyprus presidency. So, Evie Samidou, we appreciate very much your presence. The floor is yours.
President, Commissioner, honorable members of the European Parliament, ladies and gentlemen, it is really an honor for the Cyprus presidency to address this conference dedicated to academic freedom, which is a principle that lies at the very core of higher education, scientific inquiry, and democratic life in Europe. Academic freedom is the condition that enables universities to fulfill their mission. It protects the freedom to conduct research, to teach, to publish, to question, and to express academic views without interference or fear of sanction. It equally safeguards students' freedom to learn, to challenge ideas, and to engage in critical inquiry. In this sense, academic freedom is not just an academic value, it is a democratic one. Academic freedom enables evidence-based debate, it protects pluralism of thought, and sustains the critical scrutiny that democracy requires in order to function. Without independent scholarship and free inquiry, democratic decision-making is weakened. Public trust in institutions erodes, and societies become more vulnerable to manipulation. Universities are therefore among the most important institutions of our societies. They generate knowledge, they foster innovation, and they help shape informed and responsible citizens. To do so, academic community must be able to operate independently and under the protection of rule of law. However, as it has already been raised, over the past decade, concerns have increasingly been raised about pressures affecting academic freedom also in Europe. Therefore, academic freedom cannot be taken for granted, and it must be actively safeguarded. Safeguarding academic freedoms requires more than declarations. It requires strong institutions, respect of the rule of law, transparent governance, and policies that reinforce democratic resilience. And in this context, initiatives such as the European Democracy Shield are very relevant, and as the presidency of the Council, we put it very high in our priorities. Academic freedom also depends on a public sphere that is grounded in facts, accountability, and trust. when the information environment is manipulated, the work of scholars and the autonomy of universities are inevitably affected. One last word about the rapid development of artificial intelligence, which is transforming the landscape of higher education and research in unprecedented ways. AI offers significant opportunities. However, its growing presence in research and teaching also requires careful reflection, ensuring that AI systems operate within clear regulatory framework, transparency and accountability is an integral part of safeguarding academic freedom in the digital age. As said already, upholding academic freedom is a foundation of Europe's future. If research cannot challenge, innovation cannot flourish. If universities cannot question, societies cannot progress. And if academic freedom weakens, democracy resilience weakens with it. Thank you.
Thank you, Eva. Thank you very much for these statements on behalf of the Cyprus presidency, and I wish you good luck in the 6 months. It's going to be a busy period. Before we are starting now our panel discussion, we are having a keynote from Professor Sven Erik Scanning. He's from the Department of Political Science at Aarhus University, and he's going to say a few words about democracy, what is it today, but also how do we measure democracy. And he will certainly pay attention to academic freedom in that context. So Sven Erik, the floor is yours. Give him a round of applause.
So, let me begin with a simple but demanding question. What do we mean when we speak about democracy today? If we are to discuss democratic resilience, democratic shielding, and the role of academic freedom, we need conceptual clarity. Without it, we risk talking past each other or defend something else than what we intended. At its core, democracy is a system of collective self-determination grounded in political equality and political freedoms. It is a regime in which those who exercise political power are selected and can be removed through elections, and in which governments are subjected to effective control between elections. Those procedures are not merely technical devices. They constitute a historically remarkable innovation. Democracy replaces violence, hereditary succession, divine right, or self-appointment. It transforms existential political conflict into regulated competition. It institutionalizes uncertainty and makes peaceful alternation of power possible. In that sense, democracy is not harmony. It's rule-bound disagreement. Karl Popper captured this well when he defined democracy as the only political system that enables the population to change government without bloodshed. Academic freedom, by contrast, is not a regime type and not a system of collective decision-making. It's a professional right and an institutional guarantee. It protects individual researchers and the autonomy of universities in the systematic pursuit of knowledge. Its logic is epistemic, not political. Its aim is not to decide who governs, but to ensure that inquiry, teaching, and dissemination of knowledge can proceed without political intimidation or exploitation. Democracy governs authority. Academic freedom safeguards epistemic authority. This means that the two are distinct in function and scope. If we look more closely at democracy itself, we encounter different understandings. The thinnest and most widely shared conception defines democracy as free and inclusive elections. This conception focuses on access to political power and, without uncertainty of electoral outcomes, we are not in democratic territory. A liberal conception adds constraints in the form of protection of civil liberties and checks and balances. Here, democracy is not only about access to power, but also about limiting the exercise of power. A participatory conception emphasizes citizen engagement at all levels of society and beyond elections. And an egalitarian conception stresses the mitigation of social and economic inequalities that distort equal influence on agenda setting and decision making. A deliberative conception highlights the quality of public reasoning. Analytically, we can treat these conceptions as sharing a common core, but each capturing a distinct evaluative aspect. For analytical and comparative purposes, I shall defend anchoring democracy in an institutionally and relatively minimalist understanding that focuses on the electoral core, safeguarded by political freedoms of speech, organization, and peaceful assembly, as well as independent oversight institutions. While there's widespread agreement about the electoral core, fundamental disagreement concerns which, if any, additional attributes are defining features. This is not because active participation, social equality, and deliberation are unimportant. It is because conceptual distinctiveness matters. If democracy absorbs every normative aspiration, such as social justice, effective governance, and respectful deliberation, it becomes analytically inflated. We can lose the ability to distinguish regime type from democracy's potential causes and consequences. Democracies can perform badly. They can be inefficient, polarizing, and inconsistent. Autocracies can sometimes also promote economic growth. They can have efficient administrations. Conflating regime type with performance obscures explanation and weakens diagnosis. An institutional focus has also a practical advantage. Fewer elements need to be measured, and the fulfillment of core institutions tend to be more observable than the more abstract extensions. And that brings me to measurement. Measuring democracy involves a structured set of choices. We must ensure that our definition is coherent and not conflated with other concepts. We must translate abstract attributes, competition, constraint, inclusion, freedom, into credible indicators. We must determine how these indicators are combined into overall democracy scores. And we must ensure transparency, reliability, and broad empirical coverage. These are not trivial technicalities. They determine how we interpret trends and developments. A fixed measure that blends regime characteristics with policy performance and public trust and satisfaction may suggest decline where institutional structures remain intact. A minimalist measure, on the other hand, cannot stand alone and must be supplemented by early warnings, capturing, for example, effective polarization, mis- and disinformation, and dissatisfaction. A biased measure provides misleading impressions of the situation, and measures with limited coverage undermines comparisons over time and across countries. The Varieties of Democracy project, VDEM in short, is widely regarded as offering the most nuanced data on democratic development. It addresses measurement challenges in systematic and transparent ways. VDEM covers almost all independent countries in the world from the French Revolution until the present and includes several hundred individual indicators. Rather than collapsing democracy into a single composite score, it distinguishes explicitly between different conceptions that I just presented, allowing everybody to examine which dimensions and subdimensions change and how they interact. Many key features of democracy are not directly observable. Whether elections are generally competitive, whether courts are effectively independent, and whether public debate is respectful and reason-giving cannot always be inferred by formal legal texts only. For that reason, VDEM relies extensively on expert assessments, typically drawing on multiple country specialists per country year, combined with observational institutional indicators such as regulations of suffrage and how governments are appointed. To address concerns about biases, VDEM does not simply average expert judgments. It employs a sophisticated measurement model that estimates and adjusts for differences in expert reliability and scale perceptions. It also reports uncertainty estimates, making visible the confidence range around each estimate. Importantly, the underlying indicators are publicly available. This disaggregated structure allows researchers, journalists, and the policy community to examine specific components such as judicial constraints and media autonomy, rather than relying only on aggregate scores. It also allows them to build their own democracy index, depending on how you and others define the concept. This level of granularity is particularly valuable when diagnosing democratic erosion. If electoral competition remains stable, but judicial independence declines, or if media freedom weakens while freedom of organization remains intact, these developments can be detected separately. That allows us to understand contemporary backsliding not as abrupt collapse, but as incremental degradation, where democratic institutions are undermined one slice at a time. No data set is flawless, but careful alignment between concepts, measurement, and aggregation improves our ability to diagnose developments accurately. So what do we then observe? Since roughly 2013, we have witnessed a global decline in the average level of democracy. This decline is not primarily due to classic cues or outright abolition of elections and parliaments. Instead, it's often driven by executive aggrandizement, where elected governments concentrate power gradually. They weaken judicial independence, they politicize oversight institutions, they restrict media pluralism, they challenge critical civil society actors. Multi-party elections may remain, but the liberal constraints that render elections meaningful erode. This pattern is important because it targets precisely the institutional environment that academic freedom requires. Even within the European Union, a small number of member states have experienced significant deterioration in liberal components of democracy. These are not wholesale regime transitions. They are typically incremental shifts that cumulatively affect checks and balances and political liberties, first and foremost, independent courts and freedom of speech, a dimension closely connected to academic autonomy. This brings me to the relationship between democracy and academic freedom. Both are shaped by some of the same socioeconomic and cultural conditions. Conceptually, there's a partial overlap. Both depend on freedom of expression, institutional autonomy, and legal protection of arbitrary interference. Theoretically and empirically, the relationship appears mutually reinforcing but asymmetric. Where liberal democratic institutions are strong, where courts are independent, media pluralism is protected, and executive authority is constrained, academic freedom tends to flourish. Where executive power expands unchecked, academic institutions often face pressure. Funding mechanisms are altered, leadership appointment become politicized, curricula are contested, critical scholarship may be stigmatized. At the same time, academic freedom strengthens democracy. Universities produce substantiated critique, they analyze policy consequences, they expose disinformation, they cultivate habits of cultural reasoning, they supply evidence that increases productivity and counters societal challenges. This is the big historical contribution of European universities, a community of free scholars that goes back to the medieval ages. It was forcefully formulated by Peter Abelard, who 900 years ago stated, "By doubting we come to question, and by questioning we perceive the truth." In this sense, academic freedom contributes to democratic shielding, not by substituting for political institutions, but by reinforcing the epistemic infrastructure on which democratic self-government depends. It facilitates meaningful self-determination by providing access to reliable information and spaces for critical inquiry. Yet the dependence is stronger in one direction. Academic freedom relies on liberal democratic guarantees. Without independent courts and protected speech, universities are vulnerable. Without institutional constraints on power, academic autonomy can be curtailed quickly. This has direct implications for European policy initiatives aimed at strengthening both democratic institutions and academic freedom. In a period characterized by pressure on liberal institutions, strengthening academic freedom is not only a matter of protecting researchers and their search for valid knowledge. It's part of a protective shield that sustains democracy. Karl Popper articulated this connection well in his writings on critical rationalism and the open society. We would do well not to forget it. Thank you.
We are now starting our panel, and I think following your presentation, there's a lot which we can discuss. And that's why I would like to invite the panelists on stage. First of all, Christian Ehler. Needs no introduction. Big round of applause. Christina Russo, recently appointed Deputy Director General at the European Commission for Innovation, Prosperity and International Cooperation. Big round of applause as well. Thomas Stobe, who is the member of the European Parliament and rapporteur for the European Democracy Shield. And last but certainly not least, Carolina Plesia from the University of Vienna. Have a seat. Well, Carolina, I'm going to start with you because you also do research on democracy, and I think notably on the perception of young people with regard to democracy. Can you say a few words about that type of research that you're doing? How do youngsters perceive democracy? What is important for them? And how do they talk about democracy?
So thank you first and foremost for the invitation to talk today. I'm very happy to be here. Yeah, we just learned via the keynote speech, what does it mean? What is democracy? In a way, what I study is what it means to support democracy, with a specific focus on citizens of all age and younger generation in particular. So when you think about support for democracy, what it means to support democracy, you have to think of these as two dimensions. So one thing is supporting democracy in the abstract, so democracy as an idea, as principles and values. The other aspect is support of democracy as a regime, so the performance of democracy. So when you look at younger generations, we see an overwhelming support for democracy in the abstract, so as principles, as value. There is almost no significant difference between younger generation and older generation in how much they think democracy is the only game in town. So for them, as much as it is for older generation, democracy is the way to run a country. However, we also see that younger generation are much more critical in the way democracy works in their specific country, in the respective country. So they are much more unsatisfied by the way democracy works in a specific moment in time. So dissatisfaction for distrust in specific government or politicians, more than democracy in the abstract. Why this is important is because in the long term, the specific support can feed into support of democracy in the abstract. And so a series of initiatives that we see in the different countries to strengthen the electoral engagement of younger generations are very important to rebuild this trust that also makes their belief in democracy in the abstract stronger. Thank you very much. And you engage directly with young people. Paul, so what is your methodology you use to measure the perception of young people? So mostly I do research with survey data. So we do interviews. We have either qualitative interviews or quantitative interviews, and we collect opinions, attitudes, perceptions, both during election time, especially during election times, but also in between elections to see how much these attitudes and perceptions are stable over time. But often we also engage in focus groups, for example, in schools, to see whether the very young that have perhaps not yet started to think of politics as those who are already those already have the right to vote, how also they conceptualize democracy, what is for them, because they are the future generations.
Absolutely, yeah. Thank you very much. I turn to you, Thomas Tobé, because you're the rapporteur for the Democracy Shield, and soon we're going to have your report. I read an interview in which you are quite critical on the plans of the European Commission to protect democracy. Why is that? Because the plans seem to be quite robust, which they put forward. So what is your main criticism on the plans the European Commission has put forward to protect and stand up for democracy?
Well, in my opinion, I think that Europe is under attack. And I'm not only talking about the awful war of aggression against Ukraine. What I mean is that we also see attacks on our democracies in Europe. Russia is investing massively in foreign interference, not only in our elections, every day. And we could add China, and we could also add Iran. And if we combine this with that this mostly takes place on Chinese and American tech giants that do not take any responsibility. My view is that this is a very, very dangerous cocktail. Yes, I also like to drink a cocktail on a Friday evening, but this is a cocktail that we cannot keep drinking. And we have to address this. And of course, I'm in general positive that Commission is taking an initiative. We need a European Democracy Shield. But in my opinion, we have to also be fair and adult about this. There's not even one single legislative proposal in this communication. We are talking about to coordinate things better, and that is, of course, always good. But I think the discrepancy in the rhetoric, because I think we all can share that we need to do more. But that actually means that then we also need to be very clear. And that's why I, together with my colleagues in the parliament, we are saying, well, I think that we need a proper center with a clear legal basis, a budget, operational responsibility, so we don't only detect foreign interference, we actually start to act. I think that is very important. We need to do more also to stop cyber threats. Of course, we need to build more resilience in our societies. Academic freedom is not even mentioned in the communication from the Commission so far. Of course, all of these initiatives, and I have to be, I'm going to work with Commission. Let me be clear on that. I will. But I think also someone has to sometime also point out that this will not be enough if we are serious about the threat that is in front of us.
Yeah. But it's interesting you mentioned that academic freedom is not mentioned in the plans, because that's exactly the topic of this conference. There's academic freedom in support of democracy. So that's something which you're going to certainly put forward in your report, that there needs to be much more integration.
Absolutely. I think we all understand that, we need to have, if we're going to build resilience in the society, we all know that we need to have independent media. We should also protect free speech, not Russian troll factories and bots. That is not free speech, but we should protect free speech. We need to protect rule of law. But of course, we need to have a free academia. We have to have free universities. We know that this is a cornerstone of our democracy. So of course, I think, and I fully understand that we need to respect the competences, what is to be done at member state level, at European level. But this is not a threat against some specific countries in Europe. We will not only see election interference in Romania, which has already happened. This will happen, and it will happen also to countries who feel that, well, we are already protected in this. This could never happen in our country. Unfortunately, I'm fully convinced that alarm bells are not really ringing yet, but they will.
Yeah. Well, that brings you a little bit to Christian Ehler. You mentioned both the President of the Commission as kind of the champion, also academic freedom. Is academic freedom a kind of canary in the coal mine? So in other words, when academic freedom in a country is at peril, also democracy is at peril. You see this direct link, I suppose, yeah.
True. Does it work? Thank you. Yeah, obviously it is. I mean, if you look to the examples of the monitor, I mean, if you look to Hungary, say that bluntly, I mean, the intervention of the state, the appointment of politically appointed chancellors, the way where state-controlled media are attacking academia, I mean, you see what's actually happened, and you saw that very early on, because it was interestingly one of the most obvious interference in the foundation of democracy when the Hungarian government went against an academic institution. It was, yeah, you could call it a warning sign. It was not just a sign, it was the first substantial interventions shattering the foundations of democracy. So in a way, I wouldn't just call it the carry in the mine, yes, but it's also a central way to attack democracy if you undermine the academic freedom, because, I mean, we saw that in historical terms. If you look around in this house and see German oppression of Czechia, it was one of the examples where a German occupation had been using what they called themselves a selected model of terror, where they said if we want to get control over a country, we can have general terror, which was the Stalinistic model, but the German occupation model in Czechia was selected terror. And what was on the number one on the list is that economically it's not such a good idea to kill too many people in Czechia, because it's a valuable production site in Europe. So what they said, they developed what they call themselves a selected model of terror. And the number one issue was extinct academia. So in a way, you see that in history shows you that the number one way to attack this foundations of democracy in a country is simply to attack academia. Then followed usually by the unions and so, but I mean, it is the number one concern of authoritarian state to get academia under control by terror, by malfunding, by whatever. So in a way, it is on the one hand the canary in the coal mine, but on the other hand, it's the center of attack if you want to establish an authoritarian regime. And then we have the phenomenon of which makes it also so complicated that we find somehow relief, and we say, okay, but then we have elections, as you had been referring, as constituting a way to define democracy. But we have this phenomenon also in Europe, which is fairly interesting in terms of protecting academic freedom, is we have this phenomenon of post-authoritarian or almost authoritarian governments. So if you look, for example, to the Polish example, where there had been measures established which had been far-reaching effects beyond a kind of change in the elections. So it's not that free elections as an answer to an authoritarian government, although not comparable, obviously, to China, Russia, or whatsoever. But if you see in a term of a government authoritarian attempts to weaken academia, it is not that, like in a fairy tale, after the elections, all is gone. You see a long-ranging effect on academia. And so in a way, we should understand that elections are not the number one solution for protecting academia, to hope for the next election. It is really that we have to have a solid protection of institutions, of researchers, of the individual, of the freedom of speech related to what constitutes academic freedom. So it's not so easy to say democracy per se or elections which lead to a democratically focused government would be then the solution or cure the problem. It is an ongoing phenomenon which shows how much important it is not just to protect democracy, it's really to protect the democratic institutions, the academic institutions, because otherwise elections might not solve the problem, or you have this phenomenon of a post-authoritarian or the post-authoritarian effect on academic freedom.
Yeah, Thomas, a little bit to you, triggered by what Christian said. How do you, because you talk a lot about standing up for democracy, protecting democracy, it's very defensive, of course, and it's not only foreign interference which we're facing. How do you explain that countries like, for instance, Hungary or Slovakia, who are desperate to become part of the European Union, to stand up for freedom, who get away from the oppression which they face in history, suddenly are turning against the democratic values? It's a big contradiction. In the countries who are desperate to join the West, to join and embrace the Western values and democratic institutions, and now these are the countries which are gradually eroding inside their own country. And it's not only through foreign interference, of course. How do you explain that?
I don't know if I'm the best person to answer the question, but I mean, power corrupts, is my experience. And of course, if there's not, if you don't have enough checks and balances, of course, then it's more easy to turn it this way. But I mean, I think, but to be honest, we also need here to think a bit about what we have done in the European Union. I mean, of course, for us, it's been extremely important that we have built a union with more and more member states. It's interesting that more wants to join. But of course, some lessons learned for us, I would say at European level, is of course that we should have protected rule of law even more. Of course, when we were adding more friends to our club.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that is perhaps the lesson here. But to be honest, I think this problem that you're pointing out is a broader problem that we see all over the world now. I mean, it is the big return of, strong decision making. And you could see how this is now influencing the political system. But of course, I think it is extremely important for us now to protect what we have. But also, I would like to add, and that will also be something which I hopefully can get some support from my colleagues in the European Parliament. I don't only think that we need to kind of protect ourselves with a shield. I actually think that we need to advocate for our values, advocate for democracy, try to protect also, especially for our candidate countries. They need our support. We need to be there for them. Just look at Moldova. Okay, we managed, if I say we, but it was really close. I mean, the amount of disinformation and activities in Moldova was very hard to face. But for me, and especially in this world, and with the new administration that we have in US, of course, it's even more important that we take this role and also restrain ourselves whenever we see tendencies. Our political steering, I think it's very important to point out that we should not go in this direction.
Thank you very much. Christian, you want to react to that?
We should be very careful to say this is a specific Hungarian or EU15 or whatever kind of phenomenon. I mean, if you go look to post-war Germany, it took almost 20 years to sweat out all the Nazi professors from German academia. And German academia hadn't been established it had been practically established by constitution, but it had been established by the Allied occupation in Germany. So it took almost 20 years to establish that. And I think that the phenomenon in the EU15, although it's not that you can compare that every time, it is with this dramatic system change came a kind of, in the broader population, a questioning of any kind of authorities in general, because it was so much on shaky ground that there had been this kind of authoritarian structures had been questioned just in general terms, and it hadn't been re-established over 10 or 20 years as it had been taken, for example, in Germany to do so. Because if you would look to the 1950s Germany, if I may say so, not because I think it's particularly interesting to talk about Germany, but I think it's better to understand, not just to look to Southeastern Europe and say they have this kind of individual disease. I mean, if you look to the 1950s, what established the acceptance for academia was simply the very authoritarian societies accepting authorities, professors, universities as abstract institutions, and not so much the foundation that is contributing to democracy. It took almost a generation that had been somehow connected to each other. The 1950s was the old German look to the university saying, new regime, new whatever, and we accept the authority which had been learned to the bones of German society, that a professor is some authority and a university is something big, but not because it was a substantial contribution to democracy. It was the old acceptance of authoritarian, to some extent, authoritarian structures, not meaning that politically, but institutionally. So it takes a while. And I think that is a learning that what we see in the new member states, that a system change doesn't necessarily follows by a change of attitude. It needs a time to stabilize that and to make Esther happy. I think that is also an aspect we shouldn't underestimate, and why widening is not just an allocation issue in terms of a research program. It is also a kind of building up democracy exercise far beyond just allocation of means.
Yeah. I come to Esther Lakos in a second, but first, Christina. To what extent has the Democracy Shield also had an influence on the Horizon, say, work programs, and how do you see it in future? And to what extent as well, because in the framework programs, a lot of research has been done on the concept of democracy. To what extent have the framework program projects played a role in shaping the Democracy Shield?
Thank you very much, Robert-Jan. I know that you like to be schematic, so I wanted to make 3 points and the general comment, but before I reply to your question, to be disciplined. So first of all, the role of Horizon Europe is fully recognized in the Shield, and obviously with all the projects that we have financed through Horizon Europe, we have contributed to the development of the Shield. We have in Cluster 2 of the Horizon Europe program a large variety of projects that look at democracy, rule of law, research integrity, which is also a feature of our research. And also we have proposed in the forthcoming FP10 7.5 billion in Pillar 2, in the society part of Pillar 2. So certainly we have played a role in the Shield, and the Shield has played a role for us. But I wanted to make 3 remarks, which for me are important within the context of this discussion. First of all, the fact that we do contribute to Horizon Europe in order to research on the different issues that are linked to democracy, and we heard also the historical ones, and it's something that we should continue to promote. Secondly, is that with our activity in the research policy, and here I'm speaking about research integrity, or what you've done in terms of research security, we do also contribute to have to build up this freedom of academic research that will ultimately see the place in the forthcoming European Research Area Act. And the third point, which is very dear to my heart for having worked a lot on international cooperation, is also that, as we stated in the Global Approach to Research and Innovation, which is the strategy on international cooperation in research and innovation adopted in 2021, through our research, innovation, and the cooperation that we have in this field, we do promote our values and principles outside Europe. And this is very relevant because, as the Commissioner said, we have launched this Choose Europe campaign. We have a challenge now, an open opportunity with what is happening in the Trump administration. And I believe that if we really are able to work along those lines, we can make Europe stronger through promoting the freedom of scientific research.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I turn to Esther Lakos, a member of the European Parliament, also member of STOA, because your name was mentioned by Christian.
Yes. Thank you very much. We know each other quite well, and last year I took the floor as well for a statement, so bear with me. So academic freedom is a cornerstone of democracy, innovation, and societal progress. It's a foundation for science, critical thinking, and constructive debate, and it's not negotiable. Yet the situation, as we have heard, in Hungary is deeply concerning. According to the 25 Academic Freedom Monitor, Hungary is at the very bottom of the ranking in the European Union. And it is the only member state where academic freedom is described as structurally and systematically compromised. And this is not a sudden development, unfortunately, and we know it, and it reflects a sustained erosion over the last decade, affecting institutional autonomy, governance, and the freedom of research and to teach independently. Because of this deteriorating situation, I felt compelled last year to take the floor and engage and raise this more strongly, and I remain very hopeful. After the upcoming elections in April, I sincerely hope that we will begin to reverse these negative trends and to restore the conditions necessary for a free, independent, and a world-class academic life in Hungary. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, because this is now the description, Thomas, of one country specifically. In order to have a strong, say, democracy shields, it requires a lot of action at national level, or mainly at national level. Do you know good examples of member states where they are having ambitious programs, robust programs, in order to develop trust in democracy, trust in science? Have you seen good, say, showcases, examples?
I mean, it's always dangerous to point out the best case examples, but okay, I give it a go. I would mention 3 countries that I think is perhaps have some more experience and at least have a structural approach to this. I would start with France, Vignium. They have I would say at least a proper functioning to detect and trying to start to act to a lot of disinformation. My home country, Sweden, we have the Psychological Defense Agency. That is, of course, due to the long history with Russia. You also see the same from Poland. That is very structured also at more governmental department level. I mean, so these are member states that have the experience. I would say that they are in the forefront. But I mean, my point is not. My main point is that we need to. I understand that we need to do this in cooperation with the member states, and we need to respect also, of course, the treaties when it comes to many of these issues. But my point is that we cannot look at this question like it is a question for one single member state. This is a question for Europe. And we need to build up at European level at least the support for the member states. In my opinion, we also need to be operational at European level. But at least we need to build up the support for the member states. And I sound a bit critical, but it's coming from a good place. I'm just frustrated, you know, and I really want us to try to deliver something. And I think we can do this in 2 steps. Commission is starting now, put this in place, and then we prepare the next step, because I think it needs to get done.
Thank you. Austria, Carolina, Minister Holzleitner has been quite active, launched initiatives on trust in science, trust in democracy. There's the MEDEM infrastructure, scientific support to policy making. So a lot of activities are happening in Austria. Can you say a few words about this infrastructure aspect, this MEDEM project?
Yeah, in fact, I think it links really well, because I fully agree with the fact that it's not a single country, but a European, and university can really play a part in this. This research infrastructure, similar to, VDEM is one, but also monitoring electoral democracy. So MEDEM, which is based at the University of Vienna in Austria. The idea here is to have research infrastructure that collect, harmonize, and link data across Europe that otherwise are very fragmented. This means that also countries that usually are not very well covered in terms of data collection on attitudes, perceptions, but also indicators that are important for in policy terms can really be part of those infrastructure, and we can know more about citizens also there. So these type of infrastructures and politics play a role here, and academia as well. These are really important because they provide evidence-based, can provide evidence-based for policy making that is based on data. Because otherwise academia collects lots of data and this data remains scattered and is not used, but also to build credibility and trust in science, because this is most often very high quality data collected in very methodological, rigorous way. And we know we face issue with distrust in science, so this type of infrastructure play a very big role. And I also want to mention the capacity building that this type of infrastructure have and lower the barriers to use this data. Like the Eurobarometer is a very good example in this sense, because everyone could actually go on the website and relatively easy look at the data visualization that you have available. And this research infrastructure want to build this type of evidence-based and lower the barriers so that this data can be used and to know more, especially for those countries that lack the resources, because Austria is, probably in a relatively, or Sweden in a relatively privileged position, but also on this country we can know more. And I think this is really important.
Christina, before we open up to the audience, question to you, the ERA Act and academic freedom. Can you say a few words what the ERA Act will mean for academic freedom?
But I would like to say that thanks to the European Parliament and also of the resolution instigated by Christian, we will have in the ERA Act pillar that would look at how to promote freedom of scientific research. And that is going to be a pillar of the Act. Now we can, through this legislative act, which should be the first one based on Article 179 of the treaty, the legal basis for the European research area, how we can ensure that a minimum the basic elements that are needed to promote academic freedom are respected by the member states and indeed by the research activities that are put in place. And that is something that we will do. But I would like to say that something important for me when we speak about academic freedom is that also we need to consider 2 points. First of all, the fact of, in general, having a dialogue with citizens promotes the citizen trust in research. And there I would like to say that we do a lot in DG Research. Not later than this morning, I was in a conference on the ocean mission, and one of the elements there is really to have an engagement with the young people and with the different stakeholders on showing really the value of what we do in research and innovation, the value of research and innovation. And secondly, it's to have to promote a trustworthy research. And there, allow me to say 2 words. First of all, on AI, we have adopted a strategy last year on AI in science, in which we want to promote a trustworthy use of AI in science. That it's really very important because if we have trustworthy research, then it's very much linked to what is academic freedom. And there, last but not least, all the work that we have done on research security. You asked about member states beforehand. I will not make all the history because I don't want to be long, but the Commission has made a proposal for a framework on research security, which led to a Council recommendation adopted last year. And not later than last Friday, we have adopted and presented to the Competitiveness Council the first, we call it monitor, but not in a sense that we want to monitor in a bad way, but I would call it support to members to see how member states are implementing the research security recommendation and how we can support at the level of the European Commission this drive. There are some member states, like the one you know best, Robertian, which are very advanced on research security, other less. But what we want to do in the Commission is to support that drive that will also contribute, we believe, to promote the freedom of scientific research.
Thank you very much. Let's now open up to the audience, to the floor, see if there's any comments or questions. And Professor Skaning said, Erik, if you could join me here on this chair, then I will see if there's any comments or questions. And if you could introduce yourself and then ask the question or make your comment. The microphone is coming your way, Jan. I hope that the microphone is coming your way. You have to raise your hand because else the person doesn't know where to bring the microphone.
Hello, Jan Pomorski from the Guild, and thank you so much for Christian Eland and to the Commission also for your thoughts on the legislative initiatives that are now going on, and of course that's really important. But I wanted to pick up a point that Thomas Tobé made, which I think is I'd love to hear the thoughts of other members of the panel on what we've learned really over the past year of non-state oligarchs, as it were, and the importance of those. If we think about Elon Musk, a whole range of others, if we think about the power of Microsoft and our universities and academic institutions dependent on them, and the threat of Microsoft withdrawing its licenses if they don't like something, if they're being pressured by their governments, a whole range of scenarios. I think this is deeply, deeply worrying for all of us. What can we do, you think, to really try and wean ourselves off this kind of dependency?
Well, you have a couple of days. Who will pick it up? Thomas?
Well, I think, the most immediate thing that needs to be done is we have already together adopted digital legislation in Europe. Let's enforce it. Let's protect it. Let's implement it. And that is perhaps easy to say, but that means also that we will demand responsibility. And that work has started within Commission now. And I would say I think it is on all stakeholders now to really defend Commission in this, because this is the key thing. And of course, some of these tech giants will say, well, then we will leave Europe. Okay? I'm not too convinced about that. We're still quite attractive markets, a lot of consumers, a lot of users for these companies as well. But I think we cannot let these giants basically say, well, you can decide whatever you want in Europe, we don't care. Because if we adapt to that, well, then we also adapt to them setting the rules and also, of course, creating the foundation to basically determine the future of Europe. So I think that is the most important thing. That is, we already have the tools. We don't even have, I would say, even more legislation. If we just now defend what we have already decided to do in Europe.
Yeah, I'm interested in Christian's view on this, because it's an important question which Jan raised here.
Yeah, because I had been in Davos recently where a well-known, can openly say that Peter Thiel had been saying that he would have a God-given monopoly, which is a new connection of, strange political attitude towards the issue, be it economically, but also in terms of research. So in a way, you have to break monopolies. And we let, for a long time, monopolies develop. But that had also to do to some extent, and that will be one of the major challenges. That might be not the nicest answer for a professor for political science. If we let us outcompete in funding, we make us dependent. And if I see the painful discussions on the amount of money the public sector, and by that the democratic institutions are granting to science, we get more and more simply economically dependent on that. This threat is based on the economic potential and not so much of the institutional or whatever kind of importance of meta or whatsoever. So in a way, I think it's a matter of funding, that we have sufficient public funding. But what I found interesting, I mean, we know that discussion, it goes beyond, I mean, even the metas have the problem that we found. We had on the Science Media Hub instrument of yesterday, a discussion with an American professor, which showed us that based on AI, different AI models, we found in 4,000 peer-reviewed research papers hallucinating AI. So after they had been peer-reviewed, we found out that they had been so much based on AI models, and then we found that these AI models had been hallucinating. So in a way, you could even broaden the problem you had been describing. It would be on the one, this kind of intention of monopolies using AI and these technologies with a certain economic or even political or whatever intention. But I mean, I think that academic freedom is almost a moving target, because I mean, if the way we are doing peer review, and by that laying the foundation of the somehow objectiveness of science, is undermined by using AI, where we practically don't know anything on the bias. It might be that we are challenged by intentionally tech giants, but we might be also attacked by unintended lack of knowledge kind of bias, which are in the algorithms and in the data sets of AI. And I found that, and that's why I'm if you look there, I mean, you could identify, I mean, in brackets, the enemy. But I think we have a new phenomenon that even these on tech giants-based AI is to some extent, I wouldn't say out of control, but not in control. And so in a way that will open up, obviously, a discussion. We are answering that partly, and that might be the last sentence, for example, that we do the cultural heritage cloud. Because digitalization and the lack of funding, for example, for museums, academic institutions, archives, libraries, and so, gives the data to monopolies. I mean, Google is offering practically every public institution in Europe, we do your digitalization, give us a little bit your content. And I think we strategically have to look to what instruments are available. This is monopoly right, it's the robust sword of the state, but we have to understand also the means by which that kind of challenge is executed. So I think we have to have a much better understanding on AI than we have right now, specifically on data models. And then thirdly, I think on strategic occasions, there's the question whether the public sector is really intervening. So do we let the digitalization of our societies and let's say the cultural heritage, the basic data in our society, do we economize them, or does the public sector, the state, and by that to some extent democracy, still owns data in our societies? But that will broaden the discussion, but it will be that challenge for this term, I would say.
And as a matter of fact, after, say, the coffee break in the next panel, this will be addressed in the context of the monitor. I turn to you, Sven Erik, because this is an important issue that's just raised, because you do research in democracy. Do you see this trend that the tech giants are indeed more or less getting involved in politics and in democracy, or in a negative or a positive way?
I think at least what we can surely see is they are getting more important. But whether they are kind of driving changes or whether they are really kind of responding to things, I think is a different question. As I think we saw in the US during the Biden administration, they were trying to follow the regulations and so on, but then Trump kind of emerged on the stage and they had a kind of suddenly a whole different approach. And I think this proves that politicians still have the upper hand here. If they want, they can make a change, and I totally agree with the suggestion that we should enforce the rules that are already there. I think on that we need to develop European alternatives. So we don't know. What we know for sure is that the world is kind of uncertain these days, and we cannot look into the future. And this means we have to be precautious and really take into terms, kind of worst case scenarios also. In terms of democracy, I think this is a really tricky issue because yeah, we know we need some kind of regulation, but we also know that the regulation can be abused in different ways. And I think this really speaks in favor of having a European focus on this rather than national governments taking the lead here. So also European governments can hold each other accountable, that we're actually doing this for good and not only to kind of suit our own purposes, but we are doing this for democracy's sake and for the well-being of our populations. Yeah.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? I looked into the audience. Yes, please go ahead.
I'm Sylvia McCarthy from Hyperion. This is not a question, it's just a thank you, because I speak to researchers, scientists every day, and I'm convincing them and trying to convince them that their research isn't just going to evaporate once they submit a proposal and once their project has been funded, especially with regard to Pillar 2. I want to show them that the impact feeds back into the policy-making process and that their research is valuable beyond the papers that they produce. And what Maria Cristina just said right now converted my former question into just a comment and a thank you, and that I can go back to them and say I have it on good principle that what you're doing is valuable and that your research is going to be used for situations like this and other forms of policy making. So well done on answering that in advance. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much. One final one. I saw another hand over here. Yes, please, and then we stop and we break for coffee.
Hi, I'm Pim de Boer. I'm representing Aurora University's network and the Vrije Universiteit Amsterdam. A simple question to Christina.
It's a simple question, you know, there's something to come.
I got the thanks, that's fine.
You referred rightly to the trust in science by citizens and science for policy, the ERA actions and structural policies in relation to academic freedom, which is great. That's what we are working on together with other stakeholders in the room, like César and the Guild and the ERMA. But the question for the future is, okay, this is a policy for 3 years, and what happens after 2028? If this is really important, and it is, that has been proven by the pandemic period, we need the trust of citizens in science. How can we be assured that these actions will be continued in the new MFF?
I thank you for your thanks and thanks for your question too. I think there is no doubt that we will continue actions to build trust in science. This is absolutely necessary, and it is the fundamental of what we have to do. If we don't build trust in science, there is really no point in doubling the financing of the research program as we want to do. We want the citizens trust what we do, and we want to promote the best use of the results of the research, like I mentioned. So here we have the rapporteur.
Christian, you will go for the 5th and the 6th and the 7th term. So from that point of view,
so we strongly believe that in the European Commission, and we will deploy all the instruments that we have financially in the next MFF, but also from a policy point of view. You see the different strategies that we have adopted in the recent months. I mean, trust in science is at the center of all that. But you wanted to
Christian, final words, and then we break for coffee. Yeah.
I mean, that you can't avoid simply saying we need a second pillar in the research program because there's otherwise no funding. And if you make the bulk of the European research money dependable on a competitiveness strategy, you might not find these issues anymore. So I think the Parliament in its majority is willing to write a program which is independent enough to select between well-placed competitive concerns, but also other issues which are related to social sciences, the trust in sciences, issue like that. If I may answer just for once to you, we also have to do research and have a better understanding to what extent actually democratic policies are based on an empiric basis and on scientific knowledge. To give you a simple example, we had been discussing yesterday, in Corona, we had vaccines. We had AstraZeneca vaccine. Germany bought BioNTech, AstraZeneca. The German Chancellor had been vaccinated by AstraZeneca. The British government bought AstraZeneca, but never used it. They gave it to Eastern Europe. In other countries decided not even to buy AstraZeneca. So if you see that we are in a substantial global pandemic, and obviously scientific-based vaccines, so it's not scientific advice, it's vaccines, lead to completely different political conclusions. So either you would say scientifically you would be able to detect that a vaccine works, then you would come to different kind of conclusions. Or you would say, okay, it seems to be that either scientifically we couldn't prove that a vaccine which had been brought to the market went through the European authorization institutions like EMA and so on, but it led obviously politically not to a scientifically based conclusion, because some of the conclusions must be wrong. Either that was a workable vaccine, then why you don't use it? Or it was a not workable vaccine, why then other did use it? So even the simple example of Corona and a vaccine, and we not talk about scientific advice or a scientific study, we talk about a vaccine which had been brought by all the institutions to the European market, led to a completely different kind of perception politically. So the interesting question is, to what extent, and we have to do research on that, political decisions are really based in democracies on a scientifically sound basis? Or is it that we somehow select what kind of scientific outcome we like and what's one scientific outcome we don't like?
That's a nice topic for the coffee break. Give them a round of applause for our panelists. Thank you very much. We are now having a coffee break, but we start 5 minutes past 4 sharp. And don't be attracted by the nice weather outside, because there's going to be a fantastic presentation on the Academic Freedom Monitor, with talks about foreign interference, with talks about academic freedom and commercialization. 5 past 4, back in this room. Thank you. Please. Okay. And then Professor Paolo Mattei from the University of Milano. And I understood quite, Peter's going to introduce the monitor. You're going to focus very much on the topic of commercialization and also on the topic of foreign interference. So these are the new, say, elements of the Academic Freedom Monitor, and we look forward to your presentation. So Peter, go ahead.
Thank you, Robert-Jan, and thank you all for attending this conference, the 5th in a row, and a conference focusing on the role of academic freedom in democratic societies, the way in which academic freedom supports democracy. Our study was focusing on trends in the EU, in the EU member states, academic freedom trends in the 25-24 period. And one new element, as Robert-Jan was into this year, is the fact that it's a team effort. It's a consortium of researchers from 3 universities, University of Milan, University of Leiden, Oslo University, and we will present this, the study also in a joint way. So after a while, I will be replaced by one of my colleagues, and etc. So let's start with a reflection on the instrument, on the forum, on the monitor, on the studies, because it is a monitor that's approaching, if it hasn't already reached a mature status. It's the 7th study that's going to be published. There have been 7 reports, and there are continuous components. The monitor, the annual studies are built on previous studies methodologically, also the networks that are being used. the sounding board. There are policy options presented each year. We look at specific countries, so each EU member state has been covered in detail at least once, most of them 2 or 3 times. So there are these continuous elements, but this year, as Robert Jan was indicating, there's also a new element, and that is that as a team, we looked at specific trends. We selected trends, we identified trends, and we tried to make sense of them when it comes to the question, how do trends in academic freedom within the EU matter also from a democratic perspective, but also what are specific kind of national and European perspectives from a global side. Just to summarize and to reflect on the basic principles of democracy, of relevance also for discussing how academic freedom supports democracy. Many of them have already been mentioned, but also in our study, we looked into these aspects and we want to summarize them and to share them with you also to give you an indication of how we identify and relate in our studies to this link between academic freedom and democracy. Democratic citizenship, extremely important, building democratic citizenship, resilience when it comes to democracy, impossible without academic freedom. The notion of knowledge transfer is often linked to research and knowledge, but the most important knowledge transfer of universities and colleges is knowledge transfer on 2 feet, with the graduates, the students that have been and are within the institutions. And they are becoming not just democratic citizens, but also in most cases, employees of public and private organizations, companies, or starting their own enterprise. So the knowledge, the skills, the competencies that they bring into society are extremely important for building democracy. But it's also important, as has already been mentioned, public decision-making is, sound public decision-making, policy-making is impossible without scientific knowledge and academic freedom. What is also important is academia as a knowledge reservoir, and a knowledge reservoir that can be used not just now, but also in the future, and is built on the way in which knowledge has been developed, criticized, tested, applied, etc. So there's this long-term generation of ideas, which is crucial for any democracy. And then academia as a public watchdog, in many respects also dependent on strong respect for academic freedom. And we also identified certain trends, certain undermining activities of academic freedom that are extremely important and that are to be taken into account in understanding how threats to academic freedom also threaten to contribute to democratic backsliding. Securitization, the surveillance democracy, weaponization of academic freedom, so using academic freedom to promote certain ideologies or political agendas without doing justice to the essence of academic freedom.
Peter, is your mic switched off or is it switched on?
No, it's switched on. I've turned it on and off, but does it work now? Now it's on. Very good. Okay, so I won't go into detail into this anymore. You can find it in our report. But what's important is to look at the first part of the report where we first and foremost looked at existing monitors, existing measurements of academic freedom, including the Academic Freedom Index related to the VDAM project that Professor Sconning was introducing, where we can find certain trends, certain scorings, quantitative interpretations of the development of academic freedom. And you see that, for example, in the Academic Freedom Index, overall Europe is doing rather well. The EU is doing rather well compared to most of the rest of the world, but still there are worries. If you look at the average score in a period of 10 years has gone down. The exact score isn't that important, but it's quite a significant downward trend overall in the EU. What is also important is that there are a number of EU member states that have seen a statistically significant decline in their academic freedom score. And here are the countries mentioned, including Portugal, including Finland, including Germany. We can also look at other reports, Scholars at Risk, Freedom House, and they also indicate incidents, violations of academic freedom in various EU member states. And in our study, we looked at 4 European countries in more depth, Belgium, Finland, Italy, and Poland, to get an understanding also of the trends behind these scores, behind these quantitative analysis and interpretations, because the Academic Freedom Index and also the Scholars at Risk reports and other measurements, they indicate trends, but they don't indicate the underlying dynamics and the underlying factors that lead to these trends. So that's what we try to contribute to with our report. And in the analysis in these 4 countries, also building on the previous monitor studies, we identified these 4 factors, the main sources of threats to academic freedom in the EU. It's political interference. It's the way in which institutional leadership has developed an executive dimension that in some cases has a negative impact on academic freedom. It's the growing intolerance internally in academia. It's the way in which society, especially through social media, forms more and more a direct threat to certain individuals, certain groups, certain areas of study and research in academia. It's the way in which the private sector is developing its relationship with academia, which in general is a very positive relationship, but there are worries also when it comes to the way in which that relationship is developing, and as already mentioned, securitization. So let's go to the thematic analysis. Robert-Jan Smits already mentioned 2 of them, but we looked in depth this year at 4 specific trends. One is political polarization that we see in most of the world and also within the EU. The radicalization of part of the electorate, even though it's a relatively small component, but as also the Eurobarometer that was studying the attitude of European citizens towards science is indicating, even a small growth in the number of the members of the electorate that have a radical attitude towards democracy. The radicalization can have the impact of a tipping point, leading to certain points of view becoming acceptable, certain points of view that from a democratic perspective are at least challenging to support. Here we mentioned a number of aspects of this political polarization that have an impact on academic freedom. Disagreement between political parties is including more and more also the science agenda, the funding of science, the way in which science should relate or should not relate to politics, and the importance of academic freedom. You see quite dramatic shifts from one government to another. In general, mainly negative, but also positive in some cases when it comes to the relationship with academia. Growing concerns about the impact of polarization also within academia, where in certain countries, and in our report we, for example, discussed the development in Belgium, where in certain countries within academia there's growing intolerance for other ideas than the ones that are either mainstream, or there are clashes that go beyond the traditional disagreements and discussions and tensions within academia. There's skepticism, as already mentioned earlier today. There's in general still among the European citizenship a positive attitude towards science, but there's growing skepticism towards scientists and the way they use science, as well as to the use of science in policy making. And the growing radicalization has led to emergence of what is called an anti-science attitude among part of the citizenship. And as Christian Ehler already mentioned, a major issue of worry is how to deal with the legacy of illiberal democratic governments. In our report, we describe the challenges that, for example, the current Polish government is facing in trying to repair the damage that has been done with by the previous government when it comes to the foundation of the democratic foundation of science, the role of academic freedom, and the way in which the government and the science community relate. The next point has already been mentioned. There's also been the annual lecture of the STOA panel dedicated to the developments in the US, so I will be very brief. But I want to point to developments in addition to the legal analysis that was presented by Professor David Raban during the annual lecture. And two important examples of the way in which the public administration with respect to science, higher education, research in the US have changed dramatically over the last year is first the way in which the Trump administration has used the budget, the federal budgets, to get control over especially academic research. The two main public funding agencies, the National Science Foundation and National Institutes of Health, both faced a dramatic budget cut in the proposal by the Trump government. To give an indication of the nature of the proposed cuts, the NSF was supposed to get a cut from 25 to 2026 of almost 60% in its federal funding, which is dramatic, but the Congress saved it by accepting a bill that reduced the cut to only 3.5% for the National Science Foundation, while the National Institutes of Health have a relatively stable budget. But what has been agreed upon in the public administration is that peer review will be replaced, at least in the National Science Foundation, by political review. The National Science Foundation has lost 1,800 members of its staff. And there's an agreement that, contrary to the funding of research through the NSF before, which was broad and included social sciences, humanities, and also climate change research, funding would be mainly concentrated in three areas: artificial intelligence, the biotechnologies, and what's the third area? The quantum area. The agencies mentioned here at the bottom are important agencies from a science perspective. It's the agency on the right, the Geology Service of the U.S. It's the U.S. Department of Agriculture. It's the Department for the Protection of Climate. And it's the Oceanic Organization. Each of these organizations were also faced by a proposal of the government to cut the research budget in the case of these agencies by 100%. Also there, the Congress saved part of the cuts, but each of these agencies is affected by a dramatic cut in their research budget. And for some of these, the areas that they covered, like climate change, it means that from one year to the other, the important role that these agencies played, also when it comes to their databases, have been discontinued. Another example is the compact that universities in the US were asked to sign. It started with 9 universities, including Columbia and MIT, and this compact meant that only those universities that were willing to sign a compact, which included 9 components, all related to the agenda of the Trump administration, would be eligible to receive federal funding in the areas where the federal government has a funding role outside the direct role of these agencies. Out of the 9 universities, 7 immediately said no, 2 said we don't know yet, but within a week, all universities in the US had received the same letter, and a number of them have signed it, and it means that we already see a radical change in the use of federal funding for research away from top universities to the universities that have signed the compact. So what are the lessons here, and what does it mean for Europe? Just to summarize, US-European science collaborations, which have flourished, which have been extremely important in the global science community, they are under severe pressure, to put it mildly. And in the report, we present a number of examples, both at the national level and the European level. Second, there are growing restrictions when it comes to data access of data bases that are managed in the US. Access not only for European, for non-American academics, and in a number of cases, these databases have been funded by European taxpayers. So European taxpayers paying for research, data produced are managed by American agencies or organizations or universities, and the government has decided that these are no longer accessible for non-Americans. What we also see is that the way in which the American government has changed its science policy is inspiring certain politicians in Europe, linked to political polarization, radicalization, which is something we really have to take into account. And finally, without going into too much detail, but the National Security Strategy published last year in November of the US administration clearly also aims to undermine the role of academic freedom in global science collaboration, and in that also has an impact on the way in which European researchers are participating in global science collaboration projects and initiatives. With that, I want to give the floor to my colleague, Professor Costa, who will continue with the third theme that we analyzed this year.
Thank you very much. It's really a pleasure to be here today. I will talk on this third thematic analysis, academic private sector collaborations, as one aspect of the commercialization of academia. We conducted here a legal conceptual analysis trying to identify what dimensions of academic freedom could in principle be interfered with by these type of collaborations, and how those interferences could in principle be justified in legal terms. So in this part of the study, we did not assess concrete cases as to their legality, nor did we conduct here a de facto study mapping concrete practices across member states. So in our analysis, we noted at the outset that over-reliance on private funding, which can be caused by decreased public funding, may increase the risks of interferences with academic freedom. But at the same time, collaborations with the private sector can and also do benefit academia. For example, in terms of having additional research funding available, which is especially important for very expensive research, or in terms of having access to data that is not easily available or access to infrastructure. Still, possible interferences can occur, and they can involve, first, the interference with freedom of scientific research. For example, when research priorities may become distorted, or when research agendas are not set by the individual choices of the researchers, or when there is suppression of research results or undue restrictions on their dissemination. Freedom of education and learning can be interfered with, for example, when there are restrictions preventing the incorporation of research results in educational activities. And there can also be institutional and systemic concerns, for example, if private sector participation in establishing or managing higher education institutions or research institutions actually narrows the teaching and research agendas. Now, in case such interferences are established, those could be justified. So in terms of the law, an interference with academic freedom doesn't automatically amount to a violation of academic freedom. Based on Article 13 of the EU Charter of Fundamental Rights, such justification requires invocation of a legitimate interest listed in the Charter itself and compliance with the principle of proportionality. Now, legitimate grounds here can include limits that derive from academic freedom itself. For example, when we have a situation where different dimensions of academic freedom, the institutional and the individual dimension, conflict with each other. We can have limits based on other fundamental rights, the economic rights of the business or industry entity, or fundamental rights standards that limit research practices such as human dignity, privacy, or other fundamental rights. And then finally, we can also have limitations based on broader objectives of general interest. And the Court of Justice in the case commissioned in Hungary, that's the Lex EU case, recognized certain legitimate grounds really specifically in relation to academic freedom in this case. And the grounds that were at stake there and recognized were public order, preventing misleading practices, guaranteeing the quality of higher education. In the same case, commissioned in Hungary, the court also recognized positive obligations that emanate from Article 13 of the Charter of Fundamental Rights. And now, as many commercialization threats relate to funding or the conditions of collaboration, one could think of a few positive obligations that may become relevant in this context. So the obligation to provide the material conditions for an independent and scientific system. Here it's also useful to look to the report of the UN Special Rapporteur on the Right to Education, Shahid, of 2024 that focused on academic freedom. And she pointed to the need to ensure adequate public funding, especially through untied, non-performance-based funding. We can also think of the obligation to protect individual academics from commercialization pressures that lead to pressures on or infringements of academic freedom. In order to mitigate those pressures, one needs organizational and procedural safeguards that prevent, for example, funders from exerting undue influence on research projects. The same report of Shahid of 2024 noted this, saying that safeguarding academic freedom and institutional autonomy from undue influence, pressure, restrictions, or retaliations by sources of financial support are important and can be achieved through, for example, the systemic introduction of no-influence clauses in corporate research contracts, the approval of corporate research contracts by the academic body of institutions, as well as fair and fully transparent funding procedures. And with that, I'll pass the floor to my colleague, Professor Mattei.
It's a great pleasure for me as well to be here with you. As we've discussed in the previous panel, foreign interference is likely to contribute to the destabilization of democracy in Europe. The rise of geopolitical tensions and conflicts has led to increasing instances of foreign interference in European academia. By foreign interference, we refer in the report to various risks, such as, for instance, the undesirable transfer of critical know-how and technology from a security perspective. We also include malign influence on research by third parties, spreading, for instance, disinformation. We also refer to theft of knowledge and technologies for economic gain, such as economic espionage, unauthorized technology transfer. But we also refer to ethical violations where knowledge is used to suppress, if not violate, blatantly fundamental values. Now, the resulting concerns, legitimate concerns that we've also heard earlier by politicians about the undesirable transfer of knowledge and technology underlie very many national security policies in Europe that may or may not negatively affect academic freedom if not managed properly. We have chosen for this thematic analysis the case of Chinese authorities as an interesting case, which we have investigated empirically, given that many European Union countries have identified in their national policies this foreign interference as a major concern. An example of soft power, an instrument of soft power, is the Confucius Institute. There has been a global trend in the last 5 years on closure of Confucius Institute, not just in Europe, but also most recently in Australia, for instance. So there has been a global trend of declining significance of Confucius Institute. In Europe, there is still a significant presence of more than 100 institutes, which are sponsored, and they join up in partnership with individual universities or also municipalities. In France, for instance, many municipalities have joined up with them. The critics say that they push propaganda, they monitor their own students, and there is generally a lack of transparency about teaching programs and the teaching curricula. Now, for these reasons, and also reasons related to espionage, 13 of them have been, thus since 2019, have been closed down in the EU. And there has been a declining number and significance of that. Therefore, as a result of this depowering of this instrument, the Chinese government has redirected soft power towards establishing and funding Chinese scholarship. There is a very massive investment in funding scholarship. This contributes, obviously, to international cooperations, and most of these programs are very useful. However, we warn to the also potential risks of, again, lack of transparency about funding, possibilities of self-censorship, and unwanted transfer of knowledge and technology. Let me just quickly summarize, however, obviously in the report you'll find more details about this. I also would like you to draw attention upon the 7 sons of national defense and the fact that European governments are now responding to some of the risks involved in foreign interference and partnership with these universities. These are elite universities. They report directly, Chinese elite university, they report directly to the Ministry of Defense, and they are hybrid institutes. Many of them, well, I would say the majority of them, are affiliated with the People's Liberation Army and national security agencies. Therefore, the connection with Chinese defense sector of this elite university is very high. There are many European universities who have set up partnership with these 7 sons of national defense for purposes of developing technology and research and innovation. The top collaborating countries in the world are not European countries, with the exception of the UK, but are the US, Australia, and Canada. I just would like to quickly mention the fact that the Flemish government has banned all collaboration and partnership with the 7 sons of national defense, and the reasons among them is the dual use of research, unethical use, and complete lack of transparency. And we may see more universities going in this direction. Again, you'll find more details in the academic monitor report, but just I would like to point to the very high volume of interactions and engagement that individual EU member countries have with Chinese institute and Chinese entities. For the short time available, I will not be able to cover all, so I'll just give you a very brief data on 3 countries, Italy, France, and Estonia. Just you can see that the main areas of engagement are in Italy are agriculture and medicine, And you can see up there the cooperation, the exposure to the People Liberation Army and the Chinese military of this research. So with the blue in the circle, you'll see that 58% of this research is without links to the Chinese military. However, this changes significantly in the case of France, for instance, which also has a significant high volume of interaction, and you can see then 73%, so a very, very high exposure to the People's Liberation Army and the Chinese military. Well, France, for instance, is a very interesting case, as we've heard earlier. It has a well-organized structure, national structure and institutions to assess, diagnose, and thus act upon the risk of foreign interference. There are some universities already who have started to cut ties with Confucius Institute due to allegations of influences the teaching at the Department of Chinese Studies. These universities are Lyon and Nanterre. So this is, again, at the national level, we do see already radical measures taking place, such as cutting ties, cutting partnership, and closing down institute. The case of Estonia. The majority, 62.2% of the engagement, are without links to the People Liberation Army. So
Just a summary of the findings, and then I'll present the policy options that we identified. You can see the keywords here. Erosion is taking place, erosion of academic freedom in every EU member state. Also, the EU member states that in the Academic Freedom Index constantly have a very high score. Second, the Academic Freedom Index identified 8 EU member states where the state of academic freedom has been estimated to have been declined, and declined in a statistically significant way. These 8 members, we've looked at them very carefully, and it's important to identify why in these 8 members But there, definitely also within the countries, more research, more studies, more insights are needed. In some countries like Lithuania, we had lengthy discussions with colleagues, and they couldn't explain why their country was on this list of countries that had declined. Political interference continues to pose a significant threat, but threat to academic freedom is not only a matter of political interference. We see growing efforts from society. Anti-science movement is not only visible in the US and the UK, but also emerging in continental Europe. Academic intolerance is an issue that has to be taken seriously. Why is it that we see more and more conflicts and opposing positions within academia in relation, amongst other things, to geopolitics? Conflict in Gaza-Israel has an important impact, but also in relation to academic polarization. Radicalization, as indicated, threatens the trust in academia and also academic freedom. So, as indicated, only a small portion of, only a growth in the proportion of the electorate that is radicalizing can be a tipping point when it comes to making the distrust in science more acceptable for a larger part of the electorate. USA, we've discussed it, it's been mentioned, but it creates both challenges for the EU, but also opportunities and responsibilities. The commercialization, what do public budget cuts in science mean, especially when we see a growing instability in a number of EU member states where one government is increasing the budget for academia and the next government is cutting dramatically, or the other way around. Foreign interference, been presented by Professor Mattei in relation to geopolitical turbulence. There we also need to look at what the EU and what the member states can do to counter the impact on academic freedom. And finally, overall, not just in our monitor, but also through the Academic Freedom Index, through the work in the European higher education area, etc., we have a pretty good diagnosis of what's wrong with the state of academic freedom in Europe. Even though it's relatively stable, there's erosion, there's decline, and action is needed. It has been mentioned by Mr. Tobé, it has been mentioned by others today. In our report, we have presented a number of policy options. In the previous years, we've developed 7. I won't repeat them. You can read them in the report. They're still of relevance, still need attention. But the new ones that we identified on the basis of our trend analysis are these. First, what we need are clear strategies, clear guidelines with respect to how to counter foreign interference. The Guild and LERU are examples of university alliances that have proposed a one-stop structure approach, where at the institutional level, the national level, the European level, there's one unit, one body, where academics who face challenges, who face problems when it comes to understanding what is acceptable, what is possible, what is allowed, what is to be recommended when it comes to international science collaboration, where they can come with their questions. Many academics are facing questions. At the moment, it's, as also surveys in various EU member states show, it is very difficult for academics to get an answer to their question on how to develop their internationalization, their science collaboration in a responsible way. The second is, given the developments in the US, withdrawing from the mission that developed since the Second World War, promoting democracy, we see that it's also withdrawing its soft power instruments through US aid and in science collaboration. Europe is emerging, as has been said before today, maybe as the core region for protecting academic freedom, not just within Europe, but also in global science collaboration. So coalitions are important and necessary. And finally, the impact of political polarization is important to take into account. How can we make sure that the institutional foundation of science in Europe gets strengthened at the national and the European level, also from the perspective that science is a strategically key sector for the European Union. And with that, I want to thank you for your attention. And we've taken some time, but I hope that there's still time for some questions and comments at least. Thank you.
of course, have a seat. And I also would like to invite on stage Lina. Yes. That's Vice Chair of STOA, a member of the European Parliament. Welcome. Yeah, I must say that this monitor is getting more and more robust, more and more sophisticated. If I compare it with the very first, say, event 5 years ago, hardly anything was there. And now, gradually, it becomes extremely sophisticated. So I'm interested to hear your views on that, and notably also your reaction to these policy options which you just presented, Dina. It was great that you're here.
Yeah, so first of all, sorry for being late, but apart from the Vice Chair of STOA and leading with research and innovation files of the European Parliament, I'm also the chair of the Women's Rights and Gender Equality Committee, and you could imagine this is the 8th of March week. So I've been running, not only the whole day, but the whole week, so I'm sorry. But I went through the report, of course, and STOA, we have been, as Steve said, really working very much on academic freedom. So I really thank you very much for your report this year, and this clearly, and this deterioration of academic freedom is not done in isolation. It is on the global kind of deterioration of democracy in general. This is a part of it, and this is a tool that many anti-democratic forces are using in a way. So the points I'm taking more and more for me is that first, there's this idea that this political polarization, it is not only out of the university, it's also affecting very much university. I'm coming from university myself, and I'm a university professor, so I've seen the evolution, but I'm not in the university for the last 7 years. So each time I go, I realize it's getting worse in that respect, and especially now, this is another insight that I think is very important with all the geopolitical dimension and what has happened in the US regarding also affecting science and how it's affecting also Europe in a way. Also, it's interesting me the implication for private fundings because, for instance, with the anti-gender movements, we have seen an enormous, huge billions amount of money going against.
Hello, no?
Yeah.
And even I have no voice, so I went to the doctor before because I have no voice. And so anyway, now it's very, I continue. I will not go back because I know we are running out of time. So I was just talking about political polarization that is affecting universities and also what is happening in the US that is also affecting Europe. But I was also talking about the implications of private funding and, for instance, regarding anti-gender that are basically anti-democratic movement. We have seen how billions are put on that fight, including universities making studies naturalizing gender inequalities or whatever sort of things, and they are put kind of research studies in order to go against this principle. So what are the legitimate limits of that private funding? How do we ensure transparency? That is probably the most important point for me, because we really need this more transparency. And how do we avoid subtle constraints on research agendas? This is not, of course, being a socialist, probably a lot of people think I'm against private funding. This is not the case. I just say that we really need to see where the limits are to make it with transparency. The 4th point I would like to make is how this foreign interference is becoming more better documented. This is really striking unto me, and especially how uneven national approaches are within what we call the European research area. And here this is a policy implication, a very important one, at least for me, because if we truly want an era that, that will be theoretically presented at the end of this year, where knowledge circulates freely or should circulate freely, we also need coherent standards for protecting it. I think this is an important key issue. And I really appreciate this magnifying lens you have in this study, because that allows us to go in deeper. But I would like also to call your attention on what is happening. I don't know if you're aware or not already at the European Parliament level, where some members of the European Parliament are asking, targeting names, researchers that are targeting a specific projects founded by Horizon Europe in order to cut the funds. So I have just one here on these fears that is gender equality under attack, the normalization of anti-gender movements in Europe, or feminist movement in Europe, a democratic force against backlash. They are asking from the European Parliament to the Commission to cut funds to those projects that are going against what they defend. There are projects that are for democracy and for our fundamental and core values. And they are receiving, we are already dealing with that in Parliament. So this is something that it is really going on already very much. Regarding policy options, and I go very fast with that, I would like to distinguish in between the different policy options. I think all of them are really very good and very interesting regarding that. And I think before creating new structures, we need better awareness, probably clearly communication, exchange of best practices, coordinated implementation among member states. Definitely, this is should be the case. Also, the idea, and I started with that academic freedom cannot be protected in isolation from research policy, industrial policy, digital policy, or democratic principles in itself. So I think it is a battle at the end for democracy and for better science and for competitiveness, whatever we want to call it. But first of all, it's a battle for democracy. And regarding the option 3, this countering political polarization, probably I think this is the most complex one. And I think we must be very careful not to introduce well-intentioned measures that end up overburdening researchers administratively or unintentionally restricting academic freedom. Political polarization is not only a university science or knowledge generation problem, it is social problem, a political, a deep political problem we are facing. So why I think it was very good to link it with the democratic shield, because at the end I think what we are talking about that. And just for concluding, looking beyond this option and thinking about threats to our society, it is timely to assess. I think the most important. Our problem is declining academic freedom, but at the same time, we live in an overwhelming flow of irrational misinformation through social media. And it is generally prescribed by algorithms and tend to create a strong subculture, not without anti-science learning. So we are dealing now with a lot of anti-democratic, anti-science, and obviously anti-freedom movements that are already also at the core of the European politics empowerment. So that is what we have to deal with. And I always thought, and I truly believe that on policy decision making based in the better science, the best science, and based in knowledge, and how important knowledge generation freely, knowledge and good science, it is central for our democracy. So I hope we keep really working on that, pushing for this academic freedom, because we really need it more than ever now in the current times within the European Union. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much, Lina, for these statements. And it's also good that you keep on indeed supporting academic freedom in your positions. So that's very much appreciated. We could have spent, or we could spend hours, of course, on these topics, because certainly there are many more questions. But I look a little bit at the clock. We started 10 minutes late, so we have about 5 minutes left. And unless there is no one who has or someone has an urgent question, I would like to give the floor for some closing remarks. Is there anyone who says, I have a desperate question, I can't leave here before? That's not the case. So, Ivars, I give you then the floor. And
well,
you can stand and...
Yes, thank you very much. Well, I would be happy actually to give my time for closing remarks to a question, because this is an academic event. And the debate is sometimes much more important than the presentation. In that sense, I would suggest that I will just get back to you. Say, first of all, thank you very much for attending this event. We all see that, well, academic freedom is an extremely important topic, especially looking forward to both the upcoming next FP10 framework program, but also, of course, the ERA Act, which is very much being expected. But at the same time, I still see that there are questions in the audience. Yes, the lady. I'm just transferring your moderation rights back to you.
So. You do a great job. Stay there and take the question. Please.
Yes. I want to ask... So I have studied physics and informatics, and I'm a member of the European Physical Society. And I have two small questions, very important for the model of academic freedom that you have. How do you collect the data on European level? And for the index, what for variable have you in this index for academic freedom index? The last one is a K issue. K issue is very interesting, what you say, the last. I think the most important K issue are political interference and foreign interference. And I give you an example that I personally love in Germany. The Palestinian-Israel problem, it is a very big problem, and the university, they are doing themselves what they want to do, or if you don't want to do, it was a big problem. The other one is Chinese interference. Do you know that there are military young people who are as students in the European university? It is a security threat. It's not only an academic freedom threat. My question is, how do you control all these things, especially for Chinese people? You must do a stronger control for these people.
Whoa, quite some questions. Peter, you want to give it a shot? And let's keep in mind that we want to wrap up in a couple of minutes.
Thank you. Well, the first question, the Academic Freedom Index is not our responsibility. The first part of the report provides a synthesis of existing measurements, including the Academic Freedom Index. So we provide in the report a short description of the methodology that VDEM is using in the Academic Freedom Index work every year. So you can find it in the report. And the second question I will happily give to my colleague.
How much time do I have to answer that question? Thanks for that. It's a very good question, and I will have to disappoint you, but I don't have an answer to that. I mean, I think that at universities, students should not be, and researchers should not be subject to any control by any authority, not just the Chinese, but anyone. So I think students themselves and student associations in their organizations of events and life, in the academic life, should not be subject to any interference and control of the kind that you have mentioned, regardless of the type of associations it is, regardless of the nationality of this. However, having said that, we do have evidence that the Chinese government monitors its own students enrolled in European-based programs. And that is certainly a threat to their student life and academic freedom.
All right.
That's all I can say.
Thank you very much. If there are no urgent questions anymore, there is one urgent question, but that would be the last because we might be thrown out of the room in a few minutes.
Yes, thank you very much. My name is Santiago Lamas. I work for the National Research Council. The sessions have been very illuminating. I have one thought feeling, and that's that we are very vulnerable, but at the same time, we cannot renounce to the molecular essence of our values as Europeans. So my question is, how can we do this without a political union?
That's a typical question for Lina. Lina, go ahead.
Indeed, we need a political union. Not only for that, for many issues, because we are in a more complex world. We are smaller in this bigger world, so we need to do more things united. And unless we move towards we have to finish our single market, so on and so forth. But we really need also a more political union in order to do what we have to do all together with real cohesion and not increasing inequalities within the union. So yes, we need to go for it, of course. Yeah. And a truly European.
Absolutely. And indeed, that's, I think, one of the big challenges Europe is facing, is to find constantly this compromise between standing up for the values, our democratic values, and at the same time having some realpolitik. You see that in the migration agreements with countries in Africa, where we normally would not sign agreements with, but for the sake of migration, we have to. We see that with regards to security and safety of our knowledge, that universities are put under certain restrictions with whom to cooperate and whom not. So there is constantly this battle which we have in Europe between standing up for our values and at the same time having some realpolitik, which is necessary in the world which we are living at the moment, which is not governed anymore by international law, but by the rule of the strongest. On that note, I would like to, first of all, thank the panelists, give them a round of applause. I would like to thank as well all the technical staff who has been working hard to make this possible. Round of applause. But there is one person in particular who did all the hard work, and that's Marika. Stand up, whatever we can. You did a fantastic job, and behind the scenes, I know how much time you put into getting this off the ground, and we're very grateful for the success. I wish you all a safe journey home. Enjoy the last little bit of sunshine, and hopefully see you next year again for the 6th edition of the Monitor. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.